in France, in America. A lot of
The
people are
pioneers of
trying
film were
to
the French Lumiere brothers,
animate
Auguste
the
and Louis,
image, not
who
still
patented the
photography.
cinematograph. This was a
Reynaud,
device that captured
Le
motion
Prince,
pictures and weighed just
Dominique,
16 pounds, so that it was
Mulbry,
easy to transport. This is
Skladanowski,
unlike the kinetoscope, which was developed
Marais,
by Edison and was a similar
and of
device
course,
capturing motion
Thomas
pictures.
Hayes.
The cinematograph was
In
also
the
better
summer of
in that it could project the
1894,
images onto a screen
Antoine
so that
Lumière,
a large audience could view
the
the images at
father
one
of
time.
Louis and
Their
Auguste,
first film was screened
goes
privately
to
in March
Paris and
1895.
watches assisted.
Transgressive cinema can be seen as a type of film that goes against social norms and conventions within society. However, Foucault believes that the actual room of the cinema is also transgressive. He is concerned with defining the areas in which we live. He believes that they are not just empty containers we live in, and that spaces have already been defined with a set of relations. Foucault describes the cinema as heterotopic. Heterotopias are defined as other spaces that he argues are inhabited as a result as being defined as deviant. He believes that this is the case because of the shape of the room and the converging and entanglement of many different spaces. He sees the cinema as a very odd rectangular room, at the end of which, on a two-dimensional screen, one sees the projection of a three-dimensional space. For Foucault, this is a heterotopic. Along with this, the darkness of the actual theatre or auditorium of the cinema meant that the cinema soon became a place for transgressive activities when there was less relaxed sexual norms in society, with the back rows of cinema becoming known for the development of courtship. There are a range of different ways in which social norms and boundaries can be broken through the use of film in order to create transgressive cinema. This explains why there are so many different transgressive genres. For example, violent horror and slasher movies, sci-fi films, along with films of a sexual expression, and many others. Surrealist cinema is another type of transgressive cinema and is a modernist approach to film. It was developed in the 1920s and originated in Paris. It is created by juxtapositions, rejection of dramatic society, and the frequent use of dramatic imagery. The first surrealist film was The Seashell and the Clergyman, which was released in 1928 and directed by Jermaine Dulac. In 1968, René Gardis said, "Now the cinema is quite naturally the privileged instrument for derealizing the world. Its technical resources, allied with its photo magic, provide the alchemical tools for transforming reality." When we think about cinema, we tend to think of mainstream cinema. However, when it comes to film, there are many underground forms of transgressive cinema. For example, the many different independent movies and art house moves that tend to show films of a sexual expression that the mainstream cinemas shy away from. A form of transgressive cinema may be seen as the no-wave cinema developed in the 1970s in America in the Lower East Side of New York. No-wave cinema aimed to strip film of convention and break the bonds of genres. It rejected traditional definitions, aesthetics and processes of filmmaking. Instead, no-wave cinema embraced a low-budget, stripped-down, direct, political approach to filming, heavily influenced by punk and guerrilla filming techniques. No-wave cinema played with humour, shock value and improvisation to directly challenge traditional approaches to cinema. The aim of these films were to emphasise mood and texture above all other concerns. A lot of the equipment used to film these no-wave films would be stolen or borrowed and would not be filmed in a professional manner. The uncanny film is another type of transgressive film. It is a mixture of the familiar and the unfamiliar that is experienced as being peculiar. The psychological concept of the uncanny is something seen as strangely familiar yet peculiar rather than just mysterious. This was first fixed by Freud. He said that the uncanny is what reminds us of our own id, our forbidden and thus repressed impulses. Cinema are able to play on this and develop films around the worries and issues within society, as we will see when we go through the timeline of transgressive film. In the 1940s and 50s, cinema was now seen by the public as a form of escapism. Many films were patriotic in order to boost morale. However, some films played on the new anxieties that were brought with the war. For example, the fear of extermination in which filmmakers took advantage of and encoded into films. This was the era in which the genre of science fiction took off, with films such as Invaders from Mars, which played on the thoughts of invasion and genocide by aliens. In the 1960s, anxieties of the public tended to be around psychiatric issues. Therefore, cinema once again played on these issues, and the films Psycho and Peeping Tom were released. Along with this, the moral boundaries within society became much more relaxed, and therefore transgressive film took advantage of this, with films including drug use and sexual scenes that were not commonly seen in film before this time. By the time the 70s and 80s came around, transgressive films were being exploited to their maximum within mainstream cinema, along with the introduction of the video player, which encouraged the use of porn. This was also the time of the development of the no-wave cinema, which released many different transgressive films, such as The Way It Is by Eric Mitchell. Currently, there appears to be no boundaries when it comes to modern transgressive film, with the release of films such as The Human Centipede in 2009, which is about two girls who meet a deranged surgeon and become subjects of a sick fantasy to be the first to connect people via their gastric system, and in doing so, bring into life the first human centipede. Along with this, there was the release of The Black Swan in 2010, which includes many different lesbian sex scenes. And finally, the recent release of transgressive film 50 Shades of Grey, which has caused a huge difference of opinion within society because of the BDSM which is shown within this film. These are just some of the examples of how the boundaries of transgressive film are being pushed further and further as society becomes more lenient with its social norms and boundaries in order to maintain the shock factors which transgressive films are known to create.
What happened to my sweet girl, huh? She's gone!
Come down, Charlie. Was soll das? Das ist einfach Privatsphäre. Ich bin nicht bei 12 kapiert.
Transgressive film is still a big part of modern cinema, although society has changed the way transgression is perceived in cinema. It has become more accepted. However, this does not mean it has become less shocking. It will continue to break any moral boundaries within society and play on any issues that society perceive in order to provide entertainment. As Nick Z wrote in The Cinema of Transgression, that in order for something to be transgressive, it must be threatening the status quo by doing something surprising, going beyond all limits set or prescribed by taste, morality or any other traditional value system, shackling the minds of men. This is why transgressive cinema will continue to push any boundaries that society puts in its place.